Richard's going to give us his introduction in just a very short moment. But my law practice is a provincial and interprovincial practice that specializes in working only, for the most part, with families who have special needs or disabilities. And we do a variety of things, all sorts of estate planning and tax work and legal guardianship and you know, anything that's really, frankly, related to our clients' needs. There's about 13 things, you know, sort of a one-stop shop. And Monika and I have done 2 other smaller presentations like this for the PKU Association, Monday and Wednesday last week, I think. And so we've had a rehearsal opportunity. But as a result, we have more slides and we have more to say. And so we'll try to make it brief. We'll try to be done by 8 or 8:15 for those that are attending. We have 83 right now. And Monika, I'm going to let Richard give his genesis of how this all came about, because it was frankly his idea. And then if you'd introduce yourself and start with the slides, I'd appreciate that. And I've proposed that that Ian and Erica speak just after slide 5.
Great. Okay, thank you, Ken.
Richard?
Thank you, Ken, and everyone. Good evening, everyone. I guess back in early September, with all the discussion and questions around back to school for both bricks and mortar and virtual classroom settings, along with the delayed start date, I reached out to Ken to ask if he would be willing to host a webinar focusing on IEPs and staying safe given COVID-19. Although I hadn't immediately remembered Ken's presentation earlier this year on IEPs, I recognized the importance of the topic and the greater need to ensure parents were doing everything possible to support their children with special needs in the school system beginning the first day of school, whatever that might look like, and also to understand the legal obligations of the individual school boards. I first met Ken almost 6 years ago when the Down Syndrome Association of Toronto hosted one of his early seminars on disability and estate planning at the Toronto Public Library, Northern District. At that time, Ken had been practicing law for, I guess, 14 years and was recognized for his specialization and expertise in the area of special needs. I have since attended many of Ken's seminars and webinars over the years and always found them informative and helpful in planning and supporting my oldest daughter with an intellectual disability. As you may have guessed, being that I'm part of the Down Syndrome Association of Toronto, my daughter has the genetic condition known as Down syndrome, which is neither a disability nor an exceptionality. More importantly, though, my daughter graduated from the CICE program at Humber College, and that's Community Integration through Cooperative Education, last year, and is exploring employment opportunities and supporting living options for the future while remaining active with various virtual programs currently and playing lots of board games while at home. On behalf of the Down Syndrome Association of Toronto, I look forward to tonight's webinar, and as always, learning from Ken and his team about families and how they can support their children with special needs, not only in the school system, but for the lifelong journey in the community, no matter their age. Thank you.
That's it. Thank you very much, Richard. Monika, would you say a few words?
Sure. Ken invited me to participate in these webinars because some of his clients obviously have children or young adults still in the school system. Children with special needs can attend until the age of 21. So very happily, I have engaged in these webinars with Ken and have been able to reach out to more families. As an education consultant, what I do is support families in the education system to help them with decision-making, educational planning, assessments, orientation, transitioning from school to community for those with disabilities at the age of 21, and also come across many other needs that these families require. And this is where I connected with Ken with regards to having a will in place and having powers of attorney and RESPs and RDSPs and helping families apply for the disability tax credit. So his area of expertise was of great interest to me and helping my clients in that area. And I've been able to share my expertise with some of the clients that he has and those families. So tonight's presentation is a combination of both of our expertise, and I've been doing consulting now for about 7 years. I am officially a retired educator from the system, and took my position into private practice where I can support more families and parents with critical information that is not readily available out there and has been very beneficial to many of these families. So my work is very gratifying and fulfilling, and I continue to thrive and enjoy doing what I do, and particularly now doing these webinars online. So thanks again, Ken. And I think we'll be ready for the first slide if you can bring that up, please.
I can do that.
So navigating the school system in the age of COVID-19, we always talk about communication with school personnel. I engage in a law project with pro bono law students at the Faculty of Law at the University of Ottawa. And every year we put together a project, and we look at systemic barriers and obstacles that families face in general, but with special needs in particular. And we've been doing these reports for 6 years now, so they're all up on the website that you can access at Horizon Educational Consulting. And the common thread in all of those exercises is communication. So even though we have technology and communication, it is still one of the critical points that often leads to disputes or misunderstandings and communicating a family's needs for their children and what the school system can offer that child. And so when we talk about communication with school personnel, I always encourage emails and letters over phone calls. Typically, you can write an email and receive a phone call back. But unfortunately, in phone calls, things can be misunderstood. You may not always have your full attention as a busy parent. And so with the written communication, we have a little bit of data tracking and documentation of the need and the response. And when we communicate, I always encourage parents to copy several individuals instead of just dealing with one contact. And we have many players in the education landscape, from the classroom teacher to the early childhood educator in junior and senior kindergarten, the educational assistant in grades 1 to 12, the learning support teacher or resource teacher, they're called different things in different school boards, and the principal or vice principal of the school. So generally, if you're sending an email or a letter, it is always addressed to the principal and usually copied to the teacher and the learning support person. And the reason for that is that the more people who read the email, the more likely you are to receive a prompt response. And if one of these individuals is not around, as with what's been happening lately with staff turnover and leaves and absences, you're still guaranteed that your message and your query gets through and can facilitate a response. So communication is critical, and regular communication also involves knowing a little bit about what to ask for and where to point to when you are requesting information from the school principal or the learning support teacher when it relates to special education. So I've posted 2 documents there that are policy documents. One is from the Ministry of Education and the other is from the Ontario Human Rights Commission. And both of these are very useful documents to reference in your communications with school personnel. In early May, there were a number of significant issues that came up with the school closures and special education processes such as IPRCs and IEPs. And parents were told that schools were not doing those because of COVID. And so this prompted a letter from the Ontario Human Rights Commission regarding respecting the rights of students with disabilities. So I put a link to that letter, and that was as a result of a number of parents making complaints to the commissioner or the commission about school boards not complying with their legislated obligations in terms of upholding accommodations for students when they're learning from home. And then if we go on to the next slide. So in-person learning or remote learning during COVID. So this is a very personal choice for each family to make. And it has presented a very unique and challenging parenting choice for this school year. And I've sort of put forth a question framework to help my clients in their decision making. The first being a focus on health. So what is the family situation in terms of health? That should always be the leading question. And then afterwards, is my child social or prefers learning alone through technology? So your child's characteristics play into this, because if you have one child who's an extrovert and really thrives on socialization with peers and learns really well with others, for them, it would be more preferable to go to school. If you have another child who is more introverted, prefers learning through technology or through remote learning opportunities and platforms, that is something to consider as well. The learning at home and online platforms introduced some families to this concept for the first time in March and April and June. And so it gave a good example of what is possible. One of the things that came up is, well, this doesn't work for my child, or that doesn't work for my child. And so the learning style in connection with a child's personality and characteristics, the learning style considerations are very important as well. If your child is visual and kinesthetic or tactile, they learn by doing. Again, going to school and learning in a classroom face-to-face with others and with a teacher is much more, it lends itself much more to their learning style and will facilitate learning for them. If they are more auditory learners and they learn by listening, then online learning or remote learning may be an option for them as well. And it also, I didn't put that there, but it also depends on their level of independence. If they are requiring a lot of support, or if they are very independent, that is also a factor to consider. And then how many interaction or contact points are increased with school attendance? That's an important question. What if I change my mind before the next option window offered by my school board? So school boards are mandated to have equitable access to education. And education is a service, a public service, under the Ontario Education Act and under Ontario Public Service Standards. So if you were to decide, or if your family circumstances suddenly changed and you were no longer able to do online learning, your child should be able to walk into school and start in a classroom, because this would be the regular situation if a new family moved into the neighborhood and the child would need to start at a school right away with no advance notice to the school principal. So that's a very regular situation under normal circumstances. The access to education is a charter right under the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So if a parent were to be told, no, sorry, if your child can't do remote learning, we can't take them right now as a child, that would raise into some legal questions. And so that is something that parents need to be aware of. So your child always has the right to access education. The other issue that often comes up and has come up very often in recent years are exclusion practices. So in the Education Act, there is a provision for the school principal to exclude anyone who would be deemed harmful to themselves or to others. And many times this exclusion clause has been used to exclude children with special needs for behavioral reasons, and many of which are on the autism spectrum. And so this unfortunately has become quite commonplace, and the communication from the commissioner and also from the Ministry of Education clearly indicated that exclusion was not a practice that was to be used as a disciplinary measure during COVID. I have had some clients call me already in the fall saying, well, my child was sent home because they can't respect the physical distancing, or they can't wear their mask, or they're sneezing on people. So we have to be careful when a child is unable to follow the rules and policies, and their behavior is a function of their disability. That is when the accommodation portion of the school board's obligation sort of triggers, and then parents need to ask for an accommodation for that child if they already don't have one in forms of a safety plan or an IEP or any other arrangements with the school principal. The difficulties, though, is with the changing staff turnover in the schools. Many of the principals that families build relationships with from during the year are gone, and so conversations held in June have to be held again with new staff in place. And so this is a very exhausting process for many parents. And then finally, what does the IEP look like this year? Well, if your child's attending school, not much may have changed on it, other than maybe some of the safety protocols could be implemented. Some children with sensory challenges, for example, cannot use hand sanitizer, mask wearing, scents generally, and extra cleaning protocols may provide some sensory challenges to these children. For children who are remote learning, their individual education plans or IEPs could be changed to modify their needs based on what the challenge is for them in remote learning. So that is possible, but this again is a case-by-case situation and something to be discussed with the virtual teacher and the learning support teacher. Okay, and next slide, please. So remote learning option and learning support. So the first thing I'd like to do is just clarify some terminology. Homeschooling is an option for parents under the education where they don't send their children to school and choose to educate them at home. This is a parental choice. So sometimes in the beginning of March, many of the parents were told to homeschool their children, which wasn't exactly accurate. And that's why the terminology learning at home or learning from home was used, because it needed to differentiate that. Virtual learning is using technology to learn as the principal vehicle. Online learning, as opposed to remote learning, is mostly text-based. So online learning is a passive form of remote learning. So there may not be face-to-face interaction or synchronous learning with online learning. It's like the old correspondence courses that we used to do by mail. It's where the student would log into a website and just follow their plan, complete their assignments, but not really have any interaction with the teacher or with other students. Synchronous learning is learning that is done at the same time as students learning at school. So there's a teacher who is interacting actively with the students, and students can also interact with each other. And finally, a new term, learning pods. I was recently contacted by media to comment on learning pods and found out more about that through the articles that have recently occurred in the media. And that's where several parents in a neighborhood or a cluster, not defined, have decided to pull their children together and hire a teacher and support them at home through that learning. So this may be in connection with remote learning or not. So there's a number of different issues with that, which I won't go into in tonight's presentation, but happy to answer any questions relating to that afterwards. So students still have to have 300 instructional minutes per day in remote learning. That's 5 hours. They must have access to learning support, same as they did at school. So EAs or ECEs, resource teachers. Parents still have access to consultative services, such as learning consultants, psychologists. And this has been also a point of clarification recently, because school boards have said, oh, well, we've suspended all assessments and all professional interaction with parents. And the ministry has quite clearly said that, no, those services still need to be ongoing. So they have to figure out how to continue doing assessments for children in either a telepractice mode, which isn't face-to-face, or in physically distanced mode. So that's still in progress. So we'll have more delays with that. And then I have posted here a quick reference fact sheet. And this is a very quick summary, one-page summary of the child's strengths, needs, personal interests to engage them with, triggers, verbal cues, winning strategies. So because remote learning was organized differently and they were created as virtual academies within a school board, the child would not be attending their regular school in some school boards. So I have to delineate here, every school board chose a different model. So in some school boards, the child doesn't attend the same classroom, teacher, and students as they would in their regular school where they would attend. And so they're part of a virtual academy. So one of the challenges, well, how do we inform these new teachers who may be changing every couple of weeks what my child needs? And so this is where this quick reference fact sheet comes in. And that is a proprietary tool that I use in my consulting, and I'm happy to share that with you and send it out to any participants in tonight's webinar who are interested in having that to help organize this information at a very quick glance in order to help teachers support their children in remote learning or in class as well, because we're seeing a lot of staff turnover happening, leaves and that sort of thing. So there are a shortage of teachers, and this is having an impact on the quality of remote learning, which is one of the issues that is coming up currently now that we've been doing this for a couple of weeks. And I think maybe Ian might speak to that as one of a parent who has experienced that, and also some other different sort of situations that have come up with remote learning that our other parent, Erica, can also address in a moment. So your child's rights to support for learning. I have posted here a little bit about the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, or AODA. So that's to ensure that all Ontarians have fair and equitable access to programs and services. And this is particularly true in education as a public service. So customer service in education is communication. It's how quickly you can get the services and supports you need for your child. Information and communication, and sometimes transportation is also impacted. And right now that's a challenge because we have a shortage of bus drivers in Ottawa. And so many school routes are being canceled. So that could be a barrier going forward. So generally, school boards have trained their staff on AODA and facilitate accommodations. However, awareness is not always to the level that we need it to be. So that's an ongoing issue that we like to address. And then I put there the definition of what a disability is and what a barrier is. And some things are obstacles, some things are barriers or challenges. So now I would like to welcome Erica Niganagwedjan, who is a parent in the western part of our province in London, Ontario, and Ian Wogrenitz, who is a parent in the Ottawa area. And I'm going to invite Erica to speak a little bit about her choice about sending her children to school in person. And then Ian will speak to his parental choice of having his children learn online. So Erica, go ahead.
And Richard, if you have any comments from a SEAC perspective, perhaps you could bring those in after slide 10 at the end of Monika's slides.
Okay, thank you.
So thank you, Monika, for inviting me here to share my experiences. In March, when COVID hit, I have to say that I was really nervous about the learning from home model, but after ironing out a few things, of course, with the help of Monika, I sort of started enjoying the learning from home model because it gave me a chance to really see what works for my kids, and working with them was kind of nice, being the teacher. And so that was, it worked well. They had also had their progress report at that time. They had developed relationships with their teachers. There was some type of understanding with their teachers in the school. So that was kind of, in place. But I knew for September that this time around that things would be a bit different with at-home learning. And this is something that I literally thought about at night. What is going to work for them? What would be the best option for them? So there was this uncertainty about COVID and sending the kids out there at times. It just didn't seem right. But after speaking with other people and then attending workshops on back to school, I was able to reflect on this further. And so I decided to send my younger two back to school because, as Monika described, these two younger boys are very extroverted. They need to be out there. And I think that was a really good decision in the end, but it's something I really thought about for a long time and really kind of worry about. So I'm happy with where we're at now with the with in person for those two younger boys. I also like the high school level here where I'm at, where it's 50% learning at home and 50% learning at school, because I feel that it sort of works well for my other son, who is very introverted. And even without COVID, school can be very challenging for him on a regular, everyday kind of, routine. So I like that they do that they have that option. But for the most part, things are going well. And I mean, I put that in quotation. I put that in italics or whatever you call it, right? Things are going well, but I still continue to have these moments when I wonder if maybe I should consider fully at home for the oldest boy when we get that chance to switch, because I feel like going in person is hard for him at the moment. There's a lot of angst, but also I feel like if I keep him doing the remote learning, that he won't be treated fairly. I really feel that in my heart, and that's the reason I sent him in person, this particular boy. So I still continue to have these moments when I wonder about that. And I think that deciding whether to do fully online or going in face-to-face depends on the circumstances. And so for me, with only the older boy, the situation remains fluid. I think it was a great decision with the two younger boys because of their personality and the fact that they're so extroverted, and I think it's going well. In fact, I think that some of the changes that they have made with the COVID situation has actually helped the boys, the younger ones, you know, in terms of their everyday, day to day. So that's my story, and thank you for the opportunity to share.
Thanks, Erica. Ian?
Hi, thank you, Monica. I had a lot of the same thoughts about sending kids back to school or not for in-person classes. Our ultimate decision was made because we have a higher risk family member who's older that lives in our household. And with 4 children ranging from the age of 4 to 16, there wasn't just one social bubble that they were going to be in at school. So we decided to basically keep them home for online learning. The experience has been a little bit fascinating. Pardon me. Sorry, there was a phone ringing here in the background. Our children are all acting or interacting differently with the online learning. The big thing for us, we have a 4-year-old who's just starting kindergarten and in French. So it's a newer language for her, but she is taking to it better now. In the start, we had 3 different teachers at this point. The turnover was high for the online class. So, you know, now it's settled down and she's taken to her latest teacher quite well. And I understand there's a lot of difficulty finding teachers right now for the school boards. So, you know, that's where I guess we had to be patient. And as Monica spoke to, we had to send quite a few emails, not just to one particular person, but there was a principal that we would direct emails to, plus a couple of teachers as well, in order to get back in the loop when a teacher changed. I have a middle school aged daughter who is basically running a daily class from morning until 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and it's working great. She has a stable teacher, and it's been very good for her. And then I have 2 high school age boys, one of which is excelling at the online learning. The older of the 2 is definitely missing the in-class social interaction that he would normally get from being with his friends and being around other people. He definitely learns better that way. So we've sort of experienced a little bit of everything. It's been a challenge. There's good days and there's bad days. But in our situation, I think this has worked out the best for us. Our upcoming challenges will be if we do decide to send them back to classroom learning, to integrate back into the class is going to be difficult for the high school students, because right now they're following a different learning schedule, I guess you could say. They may have the same courses, but they're following a completely different plan than what their friends that are going to in-class learning, that are doing in-class learning, are following. So that is still on our minds, that if things change and we send them back, you know, are we going to be struggling getting them integrated back into class? Yeah, but so far I think it's the right decision for our family, and we'll stick with it.
Thank you very much, Ian.
No problem.
So Ian spoke a little bit to the next slide, which is how to effectively advocate for your child in the school. And as he mentioned, there are a number of people that need to be in the communication loop. The hardest part for parents is being kept apprised of changes as they happen. One teacher not showing up, suddenly not having a teacher in the morning for the online class or in class, as the case may be. Many teachers have started the school year in order to engage their benefits, which allow for a medical leave of absence, and they have to attend a certain number of days of work before they can engage that. So that is part of potentially a reason why we see the number of teachers changing. And then some of them go on a leave of absence. Some of them retire because the retirement date happens to fall in the fall of 2020. And so there are a number of factors that are involved in why the teacher turnover is so high. So communicating, especially daily, if your child is transitioning, is reasonable. Probably after a transition period of 2 weeks, it would become unreasonable and unmanageable. So I always suggest that a weekly communication should be adequate for your child. And the principle of no news is good news is often a good one to have, unless there's an issue that comes up. And then monthly communication usually involves calendars that teachers send home, or topics, or in the high schools, units of study, and how assignments are going to be marked and the due dates, and that sort of communication is monthly. You should always have access to your child's teacher via phone or email. Again, email is a good way to access. One of the good things about COVID is that personal meetings have gone online, and either through Google Meets or through Microsoft Teams is another platform. Parents have been engaged with meeting teachers, and teachers and principals have been engaging in meetings. And many of these have now been minuted where they weren't in the past. So that's an excellent practice, and that's been a definite positive change. And just the level of communication that has increased is also a very good change. And so I've just listed a couple of other points in this slide here about, particularly if you're required to sign anything, get a photocopy of it. Ask questions of your child and school staff. If the versions differ, then request clarification. Staying informed, Twitter feeds, Facebook groups, the different ministry education website isn't too timely in certain ways. So Twitter and Facebook have the latest information for parents. Taking personal notes, and always attending a meeting with someone else with you. So that is very important. I do want to make a note that certain school boards at the start of their virtual meetings have indicated that they do not consent to the meeting being recorded. This is something new, but I do want to let you know that if you need to record a meeting for your own personal needs, because that is something that you require as an accommodation, that you can do so as long as it is for personal purposes. I find it strange that they would make this statement, but on the flip side, we have meetings now being minuted. So every school board has a different approach to these virtual meetings.
And Monica, on that point, it's my understanding that if one party to a conversation wants to record it, they can.
Yes, yes. And so the next slide would be a little bit about special system classes. So I have encouraged parents of children in special education classes, and those are the cohorts where there are 10 to 12 students in a class with a high level of support, to attend school if they can, simply because those children are in their own bubble, and their interactions and integrations would not be the same. And so that is a very good option if the family can engage in that option. If the child is in a regular classroom with supports, well, we've had to do a little ramping up of what those supports may look like, reminding certain school staff of what their accommodations are. I'll give you an example. One of the students needed a yoga ball to sit down as to sit on as an accommodated version for seating because of his sensory needs. And because of COVID, they took away all sensory objects because of the cleaning protocols. So we have to work out something that'll work, because that is part of what his accommodations are for his sensory needs and self-regulations. So that's an example of what we need to have that conversation about. The point of undue hardship is the test which school boards have to meet in order to say, no, sorry, we can't accommodate your child. Most things can be accommodated. It might take a little bit of time and wrangling conversations sometimes, but we do tend to be able to solve most issues. IPRC meetings and IEP documents must be maintained, as I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar. Transportation and safety issues also are non-negotiable, so those need to be always at the forefront of issues to be solved quickly. One of the things I always have to explain to parents is that the allocation of support staff is not based on legislation and policy. Assigning EAs, collapsing classes because of low enrollment, reassigning teachers, those are all fall under operational practices of school boards, and they do have the decision making on that. So asking for a personal EA for your child, unfortunately, is not possible, but asking for substantial support in a transition for 3 weeks and dedicated service is possible, but it's not sustainable. So there are options available. They are sometimes restrictive, but we can work through most things. And a child can be asked to be placed on an IEP both by the school and the parent. You're not required to have assessments done, but the more information that you can provide a school, the better they can service your child with their needs. And I can talk a little bit more about that on a case by case situation with families. And then the next slide talks a little bit about prioritizing your child's needs. So our young children may still have an evolving diagnosis. So their needs may change quite a lot within 1 year and from year to year. So when you want to choose whether you want a specialized program class for an autism class or a speech class or a learning disabilities class, then, or an intensive support class is another form of system class. You need to consider whether it's a static diagnosis or an evolving diagnosis, how your child is growing and developing, their level of independence, the learning priorities versus social integration. Are you sending your child to school to be integrated, or are you sending your child to school so that he or she learns to integrate better and learn those social cues and help with the self-regulation and manage their sensory needs? A child can learn anywhere at any time, but the window does close for those social integration needs as the child ages. So that's a very interesting conversation to have with families as to where those priorities lie. Transportation and location of program in school. Some families rejoice when they get news that they got a special education class and then find out it's a 45-minute bus ride or a van ride to that school because it's not in their district. And so is that helpful if the child is getting to school already tired from a long commute in the morning? Probably not. So that's another consideration. And then school personnel and professional practitioners' recommendations. The school perspective on what the child is able to do in the classroom is important, because sometimes parents have their own view of what the child can do at home, but it's not the same as what they can do in a classroom with other students. And then the circle of care or the care team that the child has, occupational therapists, physiotherapists, speech language pathologists, audiologists, optometrists, all these people have important information to provide in the child's profile that should be reflected in the IEP and accommodated as per their recommendations. And then the last slide that is for my part tonight on transitioning to community programs after the age of 21. So when a child hits the age of 16, that's when we start transition planning, because there's sort of a cliff and a precipice from the school system to the community after age 21. There aren't as many programs out there, although that's changing. Many of the community colleges, as Richard mentioned, have programs for our students with special needs and disabilities, and that's definitely encouraging, and we all are going to see more of that. And so all of this planning needs to be done to make sure that they're on waiting lists, their financial planning, and ensure that everything, all your bases are covered with that list there that I've placed for reference. And this is my segue to hand it over to Ken, because he will talk a little bit about, oh, I got one more there, what to do when a problem occurs. And that is just to make sure that you refer back to your documentation, your meeting notes, your personal notes, school board policies, dating correspondence, directing first expression of concern to the teacher and the learning support teacher and the principal. School boards are still very hierarchical, and so that's the sort of channel that we take before we go to outside complaint processes, such as the Ontario Ombudsman's Office or a human rights complaint, for example. They will always ask what you have done to attempt to solve the issue within the school board first. And then please contact me as well to help with that. And now I'm going to turn it over to Ken, so he can talk a little bit about other supports available to families in terms of funding that I think every family should know about, and that's his area of expertise. So
that was great, Monica. Good work. Richard, do you want to make any comments about SEAC?
Yes, Ken, I very much appreciate that, and especially want to thank Monica for her presentation. I would highly encourage all attendees watching the webinar tonight to print the first 10 slides out. Don't leave them in your computer. The content there is extensive and most likely the most comprehensive that I have ever seen anybody do in my 20 or so years dealing with the school system. I say my daughter's out of the school system now, but I have lived the experience, and I only wish that I had had this information in my hands earlier. I do sit on the Toronto District School Board Special Education Advisory Committee, known as SEAC, and I represent the Down Syndrome Association there, or maybe I should say I sit in their seat, but I represent all children with special needs and all students within the school. And even though SEAC is a provincially mandated committee, every school board has one, and they're generally based at the TDSB one and many of the others. 12 local associations make up that SEAC, and there can be other community members. And SEAC has three main roles, and it's basically to make recommendations to the board in respect to any matter affecting the establishment, development, and delivery of special education programs and services for exceptional pupils, being involved in their discussion on the annual review known as the special education plan, and also the budget process. So often you hear the school board tell parents, a teacher or principal may say, we don't have the support. Well, the TDSB, for example, their special education budget's about $300 million. So to understand how they wouldn't have support when they have that kind of money, what are they spending it on? So you really have to ask the hard questions. And as Monica said, you have to understand, what supports, what your child needs, first of all, and then what supports are usually provided for that. I have parents ask me for a one-on-one educational assistant to be with their child through the whole school day and through the school year. Well, that's not, as Monica says, sustainable or practical, but you want to identify the safety needs and the other requirements of your child, medical and health requirements that may drive that support for a period of time. Monica talked about like the correspondence and everything else, and I would say bring yourself a photocopy paper box home from the office or wherever you might find one, and keep every document that comes from school, every newsletter, every invite to a child's birthday party, because you never know in your discussion where that's going to come up if you're talking about your child's social life and schedule, and being able to document that if you're looking for inclusion, how important it is, or if you're looking for an intensive program, why. So that's a couple things that I would say. Other than that, you can reach out to your SEAC associations for your school board. Even though they're there for systemic issues, they're all members of associations, likely have their own children with special needs. And like Monica, they can point you in the right direction. The school board is definitely hierarchical structure. One other thing that I would definitely suggest in that regard, often parents are told it's the policy. And as Ken, being a lawyer, knows, policies are written, they're documented. And if the school board tells you it's the policy, you have the right to ask for a copy of that. And if a copy is not available, then it's not a policy, because it would be documented in writing, either on their website or somewhere. So always challenge with that. And the last one that I'm going to leave with, Monika talked about the OSR, and that is your Ontario Student Record. Every student has one. And I was at a SEAC meeting this Monday night, and they were talking about the IEP process for virtual schools. And it said students with IEPs in the virtual school will be supported by their OSR school principal. That's for accommodations, modifications, reviewing, and signing. So even though you may be in a virtual school, the student's OSR, in at least the TDSB, resides with their school that they're enrolled in, basically. The other comment I might make, and Ken might want to speak to this, is like the IEP and the IPRC, when you're asked to sign it, you don't necessarily have to sign it right then and there. You can say, I want to take it back, I want to look at it, because there may be things you've missed at that point that you need to take time to look at and discuss with others. There is some legal mandates that, you know, we can speak to when things have to be returned and when they become legal, but it's very important not to be pressured to sign things at any one time, and take your time to look at it. Any other questions, please let me know. Thank you.
That's great, Richard. And Monika, can you see the various questions that are being posted?
Yes, I've just pulled up the questions there.
Okay,
I can see some of the questions here.
Okay, well, feel free to respond. We'll send you all the questions, but the link won't have the email addresses. And
Okay.
For the participants, when we get to the last slide, it'll have the contact details for Monika and myself. And I'm sure that if you sent emails, questions, that we do our best to answer.
Okay.
Also, Ken, can I just say, because I'm getting a lot of questions about sending the slides, we're going to send them out with the replay within a couple of days. So everybody's going to get a copy.
Every registrant will get a copy. Yeah.
That's right.
Okay. Okay, so the biggest new thing, as of to the 27th of last month, is that there's a caregiver benefit. If you were a person who did work to some extent and now have to stay at home with the child because of COVID, and we'll get into some of the details, as of the 27th, and you can do this retroactively if you're at home now with a child who's quarantined, you could receive we could receive $500 a week. And I don't know how long this 26 weeks will last, but you know, a quarantine period is 2 weeks at a time. And this slide was done before we had the final details. What it comes down to is if you're able to earn less than 50% of what you were earning before, you could then qualify for this caregiver benefit. You have to have earned at least $5,000 in 2020 or in 2019. And it's both available for parents, all parents with children under 2012, such as one of my staff who had to spend almost 2 weeks quarantined with her son because a teacher showed a symptom. And so she's now come back to work. But this is going to happen, you know, it's just a fact. And we will be sending a newsletter out very soon. We'll put the registrants for this event back into our MailChimp subscription list. We have about 11,000 people on our list. And the newsletter with a better, more focused description of how it works and where to apply and all that will be sent out very soon. So this is brand new as of the 27th. If you happen to be a single income household, and if your household income is low, let's say $45,000, could change depending upon how many children you have. But basically, you could qualify for assistance for children with severe disabilities, the ACSD. It's like ODSP for kids under 18. It's paid by Ministry of Community and Social Services. And the idea of it is to provide a respite money for the parent. It's the same as Passport after the kid is 18, but it's for both developmental delays and physical under 18. and then passport is for kids over 18. A common amount that a family might receive is about $5,000. $5,000, and what you do is you spend money on allowed things. And as of the COVID issue, things for remote schooling, remote learning are allowed expenses to be reimbursed. Special services at home is also for children under 18. I'm sorry, ACSD is not for respite. Special services at home, SSAH, that's for respite. ACSD is for those things that you can't otherwise afford for the child, for their care. I'm sorry, I spoke too soon on that point. But most of the families taking part with kids with special needs that would be under 18. So for a single family household, ACSD might apply. And for special services at home, it also might apply, but it's not based on household income. Just to give you some context, here are the numbers of the people in Ontario on ODSP, and these are people 18 to 65. So it doesn't show on this slide. I'll show you something on the next slide, but this is people 18 to 65. So it largely doesn't show children under 18 because they're not on ODSP, or seniors over 65. But you can see here that there's this number of people, 378,000 on ODSP, and the under 18 and over 65 is approximately a third more, which is why we now have 112 taking part. We had 272 register, compared to a lot of our webcasts where there's 300, 400, 500, 600 people. The interesting thing for context is that what these numbers indicate is that approximately 1 family in 10 is the parent household of a child with special needs. So this is not a small number. This is a large community. This is the approximate breakdown of the types of disabilities and the numbers 18 to 65. This will all be included in what's sent out to you. And here you can see the numbers by municipal area, and here's the ACSD. So you can see that, for example, where did Ottawa go? There we go. There's Ottawa. We have a population of about 1 million. There's this number of people on ODSP, but of course that doesn't include people under 18 or over 65. These are the people in their benefit units, the total benefit unit, and there's 2,000 of them in low income, typically single income households. So you can see that this 2,000 doesn't really truly represent the full number. It's just there's lots of households that have 2 incomes and exceed the cutoff. Now, when the child turns 18, they then could well qualify for provincial disability benefits. And the simple test, say they're functioning in school, but they have certain issues. If you don't think that they can function in a competitive workplace or in the community or handle personal care, then they could receive certain financial benefits plus drug and dental. And I won't go into this, but they can have certain assets and certain other incomes. They can work, they can go to school, they can go to college or university and still receive ODSP benefits. Another thing that happens is getting the child approved for the disability tax credit. My experience is that a lot of families don't know about this, or they have heard about it, look into it, make a judgment call that from what they read, that their child wouldn't qualify. We've been able to successfully get people with learning disabilities approved, for example. If your child has cognitive disabilities or developmental delays or other physical restrictions, then they could be approved for the disability tax credit. And what it does is these numbers here you can see for the recapture. These are for people whose child is over 18. But if the child is under 18, the tax savings and the up to a 10-year recapture is $22,200 a year times 10. And again, some element of the Canada Disability Child Benefit, which is household income tested up to $150,000. So this is in addition to this basic child benefit, which is tested up to, normally like for a single child, up to 75,000 household income, somewhat more if there's 3 children, for example. But we regularly identify this and get the credits put in place, and then do the back filing and recapture the tax credits and recapture the child disability benefits. And it's a really enjoyable part of the practice. The caregiver credit doesn't kick in for the parent until the child is 18 or over. So that would be fewer, but still kids over 18, whether they're in school or not. And it only starts when they're 18. So if they were 10 years older, if they were 28, for example, and this is a very common profile where the parents just didn't know about this credit. So a decade later, they come to us and perhaps they've been using the disability credit. Perhaps we put that in place as well. But the caregiver credit is one that if it applies, it applies, if the fact situation is correct. And it doesn't have to be approved the way the disability tax credit is, or does rather. And if the child qualifies for the disability tax credit, that means that they can have a registered disability savings plan. Now, you can set this up for the child at any age. It's the child's property, although as a minor and then as an adult, if the child is not competent, the parents can be the account holders for this plan, but it is the child's property. And the grants and bonds are subject to household income, meaning the parent's household income, up until the child's 18. But then it's the child's income that is the household income. So at that point, and I generally recommend that people set up the plans, if the child's under 18, set them up, get on the list, but perhaps don't contribute or make modest contributions, because in a lot of cases you still can get the grant portion, you don't get the bond. And in other cases, if the household income, for example, is greater than about $94,000, well, then you don't get the grant either. You do. You get a maximum matching. If you contribute 1,000, you get 1,000 grant. So I usually recommend that people just set them up, wait till the child's 18, and then start to contribute for the next 20 years. And at that point, they get all of the money, all the grants and bonds. But what happens for that 20-year period is if you contribute $1,500, you get $3,500 grant, plus even if you had contributed nothing, your child gets a $1,000 bond each year for 20 years. So at the end of 20 years, you've contributed $30,000. Government's put in $90,000. That's $120,000. If it was invested at 5% for that 20 years, then at the end of the 20 years, it's a total of $200,000. So now the child is, for example, 38. Started at 18, now they're 38. And then you have to leave the money in there and invested for a further 10 years to vest the grants and bonds. So now they're 48. And at that point, it's $300,000. And you could decide to have the formula pay out to them at that point. It's not accessible before this time period. But if otherwise, you'd wait for a further 10 years until they're, say, 60. And then it pays out over a 23-year period, but it's $400,000. So from an estate planning perspective, this is a big deal. And it touches on a lot of other aspects like competence for the child, legal guardianship in order to have to be the account holder, and various other discussions. And this is just a slide explaining what I just said. I'll give you just a moment to look at it. Now, once the child is 18, you'll have new issues. The child is an adult. If they were going to CHIO, Children's Hospital, Sick Kids, or had a pediatrician, all of a sudden they don't. And they then could qualify for Ontario Disability Support Benefits. But for a lot of things, somebody needs to be their legal representative. Now, in the early adult years, it's often not an issue, but you still have to have some standing, have to find a way to file their tax returns. Otherwise, they won't get the grants and bonds for the RDSP, for example. They won't get the close to $1,000 a year that people with low income get if they just file their taxes from various Trillium and HST and various other things. If the child is competent, they could sign a power of attorney, just like their parents did when they signed their wills. If not, then you could consider a guardianship application. The parents, if the child is not competent, the parents are the substitute decision makers, but just for health care. And the problem is that it is true, they are the substitute decision maker for personal care, but this really generally doesn't give them the clout that they need to get the proper attention and the proper treatment for their children that they might perhaps have gotten cooperation with when they were minors, but now the children they're adults. There may be some gray area as far as the doctors are concerned about whether they are in fact competent or not. And this brings you to the point where the doctors and hospitals think that they know better than you do, which they don't, obviously. The way I generally explain this in my seminars is that if you put the supporting, well-intentioned professionals on the one hand and the parents and the kids on the other, and you compare it to an egg and bacon breakfast, the chicken's involved but the pig's committed. And that's exactly how it is. The parents have skin in the game. And they've got every single report that has ever been written about that child. And they know, well, what drugs have been tried before and which ones had negative effects and which ones made the kid loopy. And, and they spend their whole lifetime educating, training, keeping all the other supporting professionals on track for their kid for the rest of their life. So the very idea that doctors and hospitals and specialists and so on that may be well-intentioned somehow know better than the parents is just a non-starter as far as I'm concerned. And now we're well on track here. This is the last slide. This is how you contact my office. This is how you contact Monika. And for my office, it's not so much me. You could email me, but I'm going to pass it on to Karen. So the email to my office, if you wish to ask questions, is karen@kpopelaw.ca. So Karen, we'll see how many emails you get tomorrow.
Thank you.
So we have 103 participants now. It's 5 after 8. I'll just see if there's any questions I can answer since I started speaking. I see, Richard, there's a question. Is there a budget from SEAC for virtual learning? No, I don't think so. SEAC doesn't fund things.
No, SEAC does not fund things. I would recommend that parent go back and speak with the school teacher and the support staff and the principal to see what funding the school board has to provide those tools for the child.
Right. There's one. The next question that is up here is for Monika. She can deal with that if she wants. If you wish to speak to it. Next one is what happens if you start contributing after they are 18 for the RDSP? Well, if you have filed two nil tax returns, 2 prior year nil tax returns for the child, because of course they have no income. So for age 16 and 17, and then you file their 18 return. Well, then the government knows that they have no income. And so at that point, if you then contribute, or the parent contributes $1,500, government puts in $3,500 plus, even if you did nothing, if you opened the plan, they would start to get $1,000 a year for the next 20 years. How does an RDSP affect ODSP when they reach 400? It doesn't have any effect at all. The amount as an asset or the payments from it don't affect any social benefits. This is what we've been reassured since 2008. It doesn't affect guaranteed income supplements, we're told. I have yet, I think, we have lots of clients who are turning 65. The kids are turning 65 and migrating off of ODSP onto old age security and GIS, because of course the boomers, what happened was after the Second War, I'm a boomer, I'm the eldest of 5, right? I'm 68. So when I was a kid, people had polio and they had meningitis and they had various other things, you know, spina bifida, that at the time there was nothing to be done. But then finally using surgical techniques honed by the war, unfortunately, and antibiotics that have been developed, these kids didn't die. So you might have a child who's blind because of measles. Remember measles? And so, you know, the point is that these kids are all turning 65 and going on to, they're senior citizens now. And you're getting into the issue of, well, they're not competent and they're going on to ODSP, and their RDSPs are starting to pay out to them. Who's going to receive that money? Who's going to manage these assets? So in later years, the parents, the family have to start looking seriously at legal guardianship. But back to the main question, the RDSP doesn't affect on anything as far as we know. We've been assured it won't. It's a provincial matter as to whether it does affect anything. Ontario, we're assured it doesn't. I understand that in Quebec that there may be some limitations, some offsets. What should I do if a principal never responds to an email or phone? Well, send them a registered letter, copy your MP, you know, whatever the heck you can do to wave the flag, because of course any kind of verbal, you know, message is just going to be ignored, right? I think that's all of the questions. So there's a few more. Just a sec. Oh, you know what we're finding just recently is we have 3 files now. We have a number of legal guardianship files on the go at any time, but we have 3 now, recent ones, where the local LIN for clients are providing family managed care funding. And it turns out that if the child turns 18 and they're not competent, the family managed care funding, the parents, or someone but the parents, has to be the legal guardian. So, you know, an old client of mine contacted me today, says that they've got funding lined up, but child turns 18 October 27th, and they won't implement the funding until there's legal guardianship. So I've had to reassure him that, you know, we can't do it by October 27th, but I'm told that there's about 150 families that are now getting this special funding. The program's about 2 years old, and I'm hopeful that it will become more applicable to more of the people, for example, that were taking part here. And Kathleen, thanks for your kind words. Does a parent have to be currently employed to collect the child caregiver benefit? No, but in 2020 or 2019, you have had to have made $5,000. Or you could be employed and unable to continue to work more than 50% of your usual work period because of COVID, caring for child under 12, child with disabilities of any age, senior parent, family member, dependent. Helen, Holly, can I get more information on the family managed care? Yeah, contact your LIN and ask them. And if you don't happen to make any progress, just contact us and we'll tell you more. Well, we've got lots of questions, but I think we're going to have to close it off here. A few thank yous. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. One question for you, Monika. What determines the cutoff date when someone turns 21? I vaguely remember that up to December of that year, if my son turned 21 between September and December, then your answer applies. Is it just the straight birth date?
So if the child's birth date falls in the latter half of the year from July to December, then they would actually finish school when they are 20 years old. So they cannot start a new school year if they're turning 21 in September to December. So they would finish in June of the year that they are 20 years of age.
I see. Okay, it's almost 7:15. There's 95 people. I mean, obviously we could well continue talking. So Mr. Pope, could the income of 5,000 include collapsing RRSPs? No, it has to be employment income. And of course, you can see that there are many people who are caregivers and have always been caregivers and never did work because they were caregivers. But of course, it's a good example of a situation where things are being put together by people who don't have kids with special needs. It's not unusual.
Ken, I just wanted to say that I've answered some of the questions privately and some of the questions with a written response. And anybody who has any other questions, I'm happy to answer those by contacting me tomorrow, either by phone or by email. And happy to answer any other questions that may come up from webinar participants.
Okay, well, I'd like to thank everyone who took part and everyone who attended. It's always a lot of fun for us. And we try to keep it short, so I'm going to cut it off now. It's 8:15. You'll be, anyone that isn't on our mailing list will be added to the mailing list. And if you'd like to take part in any future webcasts, then of course you feel free. So with that, thank you very much and good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you very much. Very enjoyable.